everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is former governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker. Governor, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
We are less than a month out from Election Day, and all eyes have really been on those 7 key battleground states. Wisconsin is one of them, so I would love to talk about polling, what you're seeing on the ground, what people aren't really recognizing across the country. So let's first start with numbers that just came out yesterday from Emerson College polling, showing an essential tie between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, this is part of a pattern. The last 2 presidential elections here in Wisconsin were just razor thin. Out of about 6 million people, less than 25,000 votes was the margin. So you're talking about as close as you can possibly get. Less than 1 vote per ward on average across the state of Wisconsin is the difference. In 2016, Donald Trump won and he carried the country. In 2020, he did not. Obviously, he didn't win. And so it's really not just one of the 7. It's probably Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, maybe Michigan in that mix that'll determine who the next president is. Really, really close, but not the way you'd expect. I mean, there's 2 big cities, traditionally Democrat strongholds, but very different areas. Milwaukee is kind of a blue-collar, traditional Democrat area, but one in which Donald Trump and his ideas can make some inroads, particularly with some of the voters who feel forgotten, feel like all the politicians in Washington have kind of forgotten about people like them. Madison, on the flip side, it's more about turnout for the Harris campaign. This is an area that's the campus town. It's the state government location. So it's a lot like Berkeley. It's really just a matter of how big the turnout is there, how motivated are voters, because in the last Supreme Court election, 82% of the votes in that county went for the liberal. And so that's really about a big turnout there. The suburbs, like many places around the country, are Republican, but less reliably so than they had been in the past. Whereas on the flip side, the northern part of the state, once kind of a Democrat blue-collar stronghold, has now become probably Donald Trump's strongest area in the state of Wisconsin. And again, that'll be looking at turnout there. The biggest takeaway I'd say for people to look at is mid-sized industrial cities. That's the areas where I won 3 times. It's places like Green Bay, Fond du Lac, Racine, Kenosha, Janesville. Those are the cities that could go either way and traditionally have gone for candidates of both parties. Those are the places the winning candidate's going to have to do well in.
You gave me a comparison before we jumped on this interview of the cities of Madison, Milwaukee. I'm from another blue wall state, Pennsylvania, and you said they are like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. They couldn't be more different. So when you're thinking about Donald Trump's ground game in Wisconsin, what do you think the messaging could be or should be to win over these voters?
Yeah, I said this about a week ago. I was with President Trump in Waunakee. It's just outside of the city of Madison in Dade County, an area that Donald Trump had never visited before and Republicans rarely visit. I was glad he was there, as well as later that day in Milwaukee. And I said before he spoke, and I told him this personally as well, that the message for the people there and in other communities like that across the state, where maybe they aren't historically likely to have voted for Republicans, at least not for President Trump in the past, is to say, hey, I get it. You may not like everything he says. You may not like every way he says it. You may not like all his posts on X or other places out there. But it is an undeniable truth that life was better when he was president. Prices were lower here in Wisconsin and across the country. The border was certainly more secure, which is a big deal when you think about fentanyl and overdose deaths in places like Wisconsin, elsewhere across the country. Public safety, particularly violent crime, was less of a threat. So life was better when Donald Trump was president. That is just an undeniable truth. I think it's one of those where people like to point to something maybe he said or did in the past as an excuse that's going to affect their vote. But for the ground game, for people going door to door or on the phone or talking to neighbors or coworkers, I think that's a compelling message to say, hey, in the end, for your family, for yourself, life was better with Donald Trump, and it can be again going forward.
I do want to talk about money a bit because we are Forbes. So let's talk about how much each candidate has raised. Just yesterday, there were reports out that Vice President Kamala Harris has raised over $1 billion. But in August, here are the numbers. Harris had $235.5 million on hand at the end of the month compared to Donald Trump's $134.6 million. In Wisconsin, do Democrats have a better ground game right now, A? And B, how do you compete with that kind of cash?
Well, they do, and the two go hand in hand. They're funding their ground game. They're paying. They've got hundreds of paid staff across the state. We can see it. It has an impact not just on the presidential race, but on other races out there. They should be blowing us away, considering the financial edge they have, and in turn what they're able to do with their ground game, with all these paid staffers then orchestrating and organizing people going door to door, even things as detailed as organizing groups of people writing postcards out to undecided, persuadable voters. So they have a huge financial advantage. The biggest thing that's keeping Republicans, particularly Donald Trump, in the game is that the strength of our issues, the issue matrix, is on the side of conservatives. When you talk about high prices in the economy, when you talk about border security and things like fentanyl overdoses, when you talk about violent crime and public safety concerns, those are the top issues we see. Even at Young America's Foundation, the polling we do, we see college students, number one issue is the economy. So if college students are feeling that way, that's eating into every major Democrat voting category where they've run the score up before. That's what's keeping it competitive, not only in the presidential, but even in this U.S. Senate race between Senator Tammy Baldwin, who's been in Washington about a quarter century, and businessman Eric Hovde. Those are the things that are leveling off. If it was just about money, Harris Waltz, the Democrat ticket, would be blowing Republicans away. Thankfully, the issues are such that it does give a balance to all that money and boots on the ground that we see here in the state.
And we'll move on to that Senate race in just a little bit, but as a Republican who has won multiple elections in the state, do you think this is going to come out to getting those undecided voters, getting those independents, or do you think that this election's coming out more to turnout?
Well, I think it's a combination. I don't think you exclude one or the other. Certainly, it's a big part. It's about turnout. I think part of the turnout model, though, is for Republicans or even some of those that weren't necessarily Republican voters, but who just had it with the last 4 years. They're exhausted, not from the post on X, like some people said they were 4 years ago, but just exhausted from the high prices, from the overwhelming challenges families face all across the country. The key, though, is why turnout and persuasion go hand in hand, is there's a lot of those voters, particularly, say, in the suburbs of Milwaukee, who really had given up on Joe Biden, who thought not only was their own problems affecting them in terms of high prices for gas, for food, for their housing, but they just didn't think that Joe Biden was cut to be a president for the next 4 years. They saw some serious challenges, particularly after that first presidential debate. That slipped for a little bit. Some of those folks retreated from leaning towards President Trump after Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, got in the race, just because they said, okay, she's new, she's fresh, she's dynamic, she's got to be better. And the key has been for me and others who've been advocates for President Trump is to connect the dots, to say Joe Biden's policies failed not because he was out of touch, not because of his age, not because of his demeanor, but because they're horrible ideas. They've had a negative effect on the economy. And of course, there was a big benefit in the last few weeks between President Biden himself saying that Vice President Harris had been a part of every major decision throughout his tenure. And then even just this week on The View, when Vice President Harris said she couldn't think of a thing that she'd do differently than President Biden. That really makes the case that I think is compelling, not only for President Trump and Senator Vance, but for everybody else pushing this ticket to say, if you've had it over the last 4 years, if you just can't afford 4 more years of these policies, you got to vote to make a change. And that's where the turnout and persuasion go hand in hand.
I want to move on down ballot now to that Senate race that really could decide what the balance of power is in the Senate. Democratic Senator, who's the incumbent, Tammy Baldwin, is polling at 50% to Republican Eric Hovde's 46%. And this is from the Emerson College poll that I cited earlier. You hear that number, and she has gained 1 point since September. What are you thinking?
Well, it's going to definitely tightening up. One of the key factors I've said all along was for Eric Hovde to win, who I think is a very quality candidate. He needs Donald Trump to do well. Ideally, Trump wins by a point or two, and then that makes this very competitive race, I think, within grasp. The issue matrix they're talking about is the same. The added bonus that Hovde has is he can point to Senator Baldwin and say, Tammy Baldwin's been in Washington for a quarter century. It's time for somebody new. He can play that off along with the economic issues, the border safety and public safety issues that I mentioned that are brought up in the presidential race. I think that's really is key. The other factor I think we see in all this is because it's become a given, all but a given in West Virginia that Jim Justice, the governor there, is going to win the seat formerly held or currently held, but soon to be formally held by Senator Joe Manchin. And then the race in Montana clearly shifting towards Tim Sheehy, the Navy SEAL, against Senator Tester. That opens the door for a lot of other groups, not only the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, but groups like Americans for Prosperity and others, to put more resources into a handful of states, Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. There's a number of key races, and I think that helped by being able to shift some of those resources. That's helped Hovde level the playing field with the enormous financial advantage that Senator Baldwin has in this race.
I want to talk about the data here because obviously, and how it's being used, because it is a tight race, as you and I have talked about, as pretty much everyone has been talking about, and how the numbers have been shown now for months. How closely are you working with former President Trump, and how much is his team using this data, and how does that contribute to what his moves are in the state?
Yeah, they're clearly very effective on the data side. My wife, my adult children, and my daughter-in-law all get tons of not only direct mail, but increasingly more and more text, emails, other things here in Wisconsin from the Trump campaign, from the party, from Trump Force 47. I think I get those a couple times a week for calls. I've been a part of them myself. I've just got one today from Senator Ron Johnson. I set up an account just to follow things that are set up just for the average activist, not just for me to see just exactly how effective some of these things are. We get them all the time. And so I think their data use is really effective. Again, financially, they don't have the kind of resources that we see on the left. So there aren't as many boots on the ground in terms of paid staff. But there's definitely been a certain advantage when it comes to enthusiasm. And so you tremendous crowds coming out, obviously, with President Trump, or to a certain degree when J.D. Vance comes to town. And then myself, former Governor Thompson, and others, what we've tried to hammer away at those events is, it's great you're here, but being here doesn't change the minds of people back in your neighborhood, in your community. You got to sign up for Trump Force 47 and go out and make those calls, make those connections, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers. And that's really going to be the key. And what I presume will be, is it has been the last two cycles, a very tight election.
Like I said at the top of this conversation, I am a native Pennsylvanian, born and raised there, went to school there. And when I hear national conversations about the state, because it is so important in this election, sometimes you can say, hey, they're getting it right here, but that's not exactly right about the Pennsylvania voter. So I am curious, as someone who is on the ground in Wisconsin, do you feel that way about your state? What do you think is missing from the national conversation?
Yeah, well, I got ripped the night of the vice presidential candidate debate because near the end, when they brought up January 6th, I said, people have moved on. Now, people like Liz Cheney and others mischaracterized that into saying that I said people didn't care about it. I said, I didn't say they didn't care about it. They cared about it on January 6th. They carried out for a while after, but today, nearly 4 years after, people have moved on from January 6th. What they care about is how much it costs to fill up their grocery cart, how much it costs when I go over the Quick Trip to fill my gas tank up, how much it costs for housing or rent. When I think of my son and daughter-in-law and how they're paying nearly $1,000 more a month in mortgage than they would have 4 years ago when Donald Trump was president. They care about border security and the concern they have over fentanyl and other overdoses. These are the things that people care about. And so I'm always amazed certainly with some of the national media, as we saw in that debate, but even with some of the tactics about democracy and other things in that regard. Know what people care about. Yes, they care about those larger issues. But I think, again, polling we even did at Young America's Foundation, young people, they're just as concerned the more they hear stories, about Facebook withholding certain information 4 years ago during the campaign, or about restrictions on free speech or other things. Those are issues that go across the political spectrum, but they're not the motivator between whether you vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. The bottom line there is who's going to be on the right side of the issues. What issues do people care about the most? And again, right now, the issues when I go around, and I live right here at Pewaukee Lake. When I go talk to people, when I'm over at the pump at Quick Trip, when I go in to pick up a half gallon of milk, other things inside, what they're worried about is how much it costs to get groceries and gas, how much it costs to pay their mortgage, or their rent if they're a renter. Those are the things that people care about. And to the extent that a candidate's not talking about those things, they're losing.
Governor, before I let you go, I would like to ask you one final question. You are a multi-term governor. You also ran for president back in 2016. Do you see a political future for yourself? Are you ever considering throwing your hat back in the ring in politics?
Well, it's a fun question. I'm literally a quarter century younger than Joe Biden, so I got plenty of time. Not that I would necessarily wait that long, but part of the reason why I'm working with college, high school, and middle school students at Young America's Foundation right now is the last few cycles I've seen the margins amongst younger voters, 18 to 29-year voters, go overwhelmingly for the liberal candidates. And I said it's something we can't just address a couple weeks out with some clever ads. It's something where we've got to go not only to colleges, but into high schools, middle schools, and younger, and level the playing field. After the 2022 election, some of the media, again, misportrayed something I said about younger voters being the determining factor. More than candidates, more than even specific issues, it was that huge margin. In places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, and elsewhere, some of those margins were 30 to 40 points in favor of the liberal candidate over the conservative in these swing states, and it was younger voters. And I just said, I'm not afraid of younger voters. I'm afraid of younger voters who've only heard one side of the story. So my quest over the next few years is to try and level the playing field, to make sure that Generation Z going forward gets access to all the information, not only about current affairs, but about American history and world history. And if we can do that effectively, then who knows? We'll see what the future holds, but haven't written it off.
Well, Governor, I appreciate the conversation today, and I hope you can come back soon, join me again, break down the state of the race. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.